In a world that often overlooks the quiet struggles hidden behind young faces, there was a boy whose voice carried a story far beyond his years, a boy named Daniel who stood on the grand stage of a televised talent show, his small hands clutching the microphone as though it were the last thread connecting him to a dream he could not let slip away, and as the lights dimmed and the vast sea of eyes turned toward him, he drew in a breath that carried the weight of every sleepless night, every whispered prayer, and every moment of doubt he had endured. Daniel had not come from comfort or privilege. His home was a modest apartment on the edge of a forgotten town, where his mother worked double shifts at a diner and his father had long disappeared into the haze of memory, leaving behind nothing but questions Daniel never dared to ask. Music was his refuge, his sanctuary from the noise of poverty, and in the quiet corners of his room, with walls thin enough to hear the sirens outside, he taught himself to sing, pouring his soul into melodies that became his way of surviving. That night, as he stood before the judges and an audience larger than anything he had ever known, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on his chest, yet in his eyes there was a fire, fragile but undeniable, the fire of a boy who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The host introduced him, the applause faded, and Daniel whispered his song choice, Hotel California. The judges glanced at one another, surprised by the bold decision, for it was not an easy song, not a safe song, but one etched in history, demanding both courage and soul. The first chords played, and silence fell, the kind of silence that makes hearts beat louder, and when Daniel opened his mouth, the world shifted. His voice was raw yet hauntingly beautiful, each note carrying not just sound but emotion, a trembling honesty that reached into the hearts of strangers. It was as if he was not merely singing lyrics, but telling a story, his story, of being lost and searching for a place to belong, of finding beauty in the brokenness of life. The judges leaned forward, their hands slowly unclenching, their pens dropping onto the desk, and in their eyes a reflection of something deeper stirred, for Daniel's voice was not polished by wealth or refined by training, it was shaped by hardship, sculpted by nights of hunger, and softened by the tenderness of a boy who still believed in hope despite everything. The audience, too, was swept into the tide of his song, some wiping tears without realizing it, some closing their eyes as though to absorb the moment more fully. Halfway through the performance, something extraordinary happened. His voice cracked, just slightly, betraying the vulnerability he carried, but instead of faltering, he leaned into it, letting the imperfection become part of the truth he was sharing, and in that crack, people heard not failure, but humanity, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's mother, watching from the audience, clutched her hands together, tears streaming down her cheeks, for she knew how much this moment meant, how many nights Daniel had stayed awake humming to himself so the hunger would not overwhelm him, how many mornings he had walked to school with worn-out shoes, humming the same melodies to keep his heart alive. She had worried that the world would be too cruel, that it would break him before he could shine, but here he was, shining not in spite of his struggles but because of them. As Daniel reached the final chorus, something within him surged, as though he had poured every ounce of his being into this last climb, and his voice soared, filling the hall with a trembling, aching beauty that made the air itself seem sacred. When the final note faded, there was no immediate applause, only silence, heavy, reverent silence, the kind that comes when words are not enough. Then, suddenly, the hall erupted, the audience rising to their feet in thunderous applause, tears streaming, hands clapping until they hurt, and the judges sat motionless for a moment, visibly shaken, their expressions softened into awe. One judge, a man known for his harsh critiques, had tears glistening in his eyes as he whispered, that wasn't just a performance. That was a confession, a prayer, a gift. Another judge, her voice trembling, asked Daniel what inspired him to sing with such depth, and Daniel, holding back tears, simply said, "Because music is the only thing that never left me. When I felt alone, it stayed. And tonight, I wanted to share that with you." The crowd quieted, their hearts struck by the purity of his words. At that moment, the youngest judge, visibly moved, pressed the golden buzzer, showering the stage with glittering light, and the roar of the crowd grew louder, echoing like thunder. Daniel covered his face with his small hands, overwhelmed, and his mother rushed forward, embracing him as if to hold together all the broken pieces that life had scattered. But the story did not end there, for as cameras captured the triumph, the world beyond the stage began to shift. His performance went viral, spreading across the globe, reaching millions who saw in his voice their own struggles, their own longing for hope. Letters poured in from strangers, some saying his song gave them courage to face their battles, others saying it reminded them of their own children, or their lost parents, or the dreams they had abandoned. Donations began to flood toward Daniel's family, enough to lift them from the weight of poverty, but Daniel, humble as ever, asked that much of it be shared with children like him, those still waiting for someone to hear their voices. The judges, shaken by his generosity, invited him back not only to perform again but to tell his story, and with each appearance, Daniel reminded the world that greatness is not born from perfection, but from honesty, from the willingness to pour out one's heart even when it trembles. Months later, when asked what his favorite memory was from that night, Daniel did not speak of the golden buzzer, or the applause, or the fame that followed. Instead, he said softly, "It was seeing my mom smile without worry, just for a moment. That was enough." And in that answer lay the heart of his journey, a reminder that sometimes the greatest performances are not measured in notes or accolades, but in the love they awaken, the hope they ignite, and the humanity they restore. His story became a living testament that no matter how heavy the darkness, a single voice filled with truth can light the way, and though judges and audiences may forget many performances, they would never forget the boy whose emotional Hotel California performance left them shaking, not because he sang perfectly, but because he sang honestly, and in doing so, reminded the world that even in brokenness, beauty lives, and even in hardship, hope survives, and even in the smallest voice, if it dares to be heard, there lies the power to move mountains, heal hearts, and change lives forever.